We are joined by the Vice Chairman of the NITI Aayog, Mr. Kumar. Many thanks for joining us. When we last spoke, you had talked about the possibility of some relaxations. Now, as we enter the phase of lockdown 2.0, today the Ministry of Home Affairs has put out the clarification on what will now be allowed in areas that are non-containment zones. Given what the experience is so far, would it be fair to assume that come the 3rd of May, we will see further relaxations perhaps, but this calibrated exit strategy will continue to play itself out? So my short point that on the 3rd of May, should there be an assumption that we will get back to business as normal, or will this calibration exit continue?
Shereen, good to be here, and also an important question that you asked. But you will appreciate the fact that the response will depend entirely on how the virus itself, the pandemic itself plays out. Because really there are no guesses here, there can be no assumptions here. We are all hoping very much, of course, that by this very strict lockdown the next week up to the 20th, we would have broken the back of the pandemic, and our rising in our infection rate would come down, would plateau, and as it does that, there will be further relaxation to come. But for example, to talk about business as usual could be I think quite premature, because institutions, for example, educational institutions will not open. You may not get again the permission to have religious congregations or marriage ceremonies and parties, etc. I think knowing what you and I do about how this virus is going to play itself out, caution would have to be still exercised. Yet, a lot can be done to get the economic activity back on track, though may not be, if you like, the social activity back to business as usual.
I'm glad that you brought up that issue, sir, and as you pointed out, that perhaps even post the 3rd of May, social consumption may not necessarily pick up or get back to where it was pre-COVID because of the containment measures. But I want to now talk about the impact on the economy, sir. And, now we've got most estimates coming in. The IMF for 2020 at 1.9%, Barclays at 0% for calendar year 20, GDP growth at minus 0.5% for 2020. That's Nomura. When we last spoke, you did say that the NITI Aayog has not done any quantitative analysis on the economic impact. But given the fact that we're now talking about a 40-day lockdown, what is your own sense of how adequate the measures that have been announced on the fiscal side have been or are to take care of the economic impact?
First thing I want to say, Shereen, is that I think the people are being very brave to make these forecasts for the whole financial year, fiscal 21, at this point of time. This is just the beginning of the year. We know that this month is lost in terms of large amounts of economic activity, though not lost for agriculture, as you would recognize, for entire chain of agricultural operations that have been put into essential services and are permitted. So our Rabi harvest will come in quite nicely, and it's been, I believe, one of the best crops and the best harvest that you can see. So we haven't not been foolhardy enough to make forecasts at this point of time. And may I just venture one hunch, which is that I don't think people who are forecasting zeros and negatives, etc. These Cassandras, I don't think will be proven right, because once the economic activity starts, come our second quarter, I think you will see a fairly strong recovery in the country for the next 3 quarters of fiscal 21. To support that, I'm sure the government will come up with the fiscal stimulus, with the fiscal policies that are required. I think it's quite a clear understanding within the government and the RBI that we have to do whatever it takes to get the economy back on track. And we know that the implications of a very weak growth are going to be negative. So I'm convinced that with the fiscal policy package now in the making, you will see economic activity going back quite strongly in the second quarter onwards, so that some of these forecasts will hopefully be proven wrong.
Sir, you're pointing out that the recovery will hinge on the fiscal relief that the government and, of course, more measures from the Reserve Bank of India. You said that the fiscal package is in the making. Whether any industry association that you speak to, or if you look at what's happening, even as far as the daily wage community is concerned, the most vulnerable sections of society, the question being asked is why is it taking it so long? Why haven't we seen the fiscal relief package being announced already? We saw that 1.76 lakh crore rupee package being announced by the government, but that was a while back. And since then, the situation has changed significantly and it warrants urgent relief. In fact, every industry body is saying the time is now. So how long will it take for this fiscal package to be in the making?
Well, the two responses to that. One, I think it's quite clear, and I think everybody agrees to the fact that our primary concern and our primary focus must still remain, to save lives and to try and ensure that we don't have the pandemic spreading, as it has done in other countries. We can't afford that. We don't want to do it. The Prime Minister has taken the steps early on to be ahead of the curve, and this is where we want to be. So that's where the focus is. And therefore, that has taken the primacy in terms of policy attention and in terms of policy announcements. Now, you said yourself that one package has already been announced. The second one, as I said, is in the making. India is a complex country. India is a complex economy. Our diversity is significant. To come up with a pan-India, solution, to come up with some guidelines. I think it takes time to develop these. Plus, I think you will recognize that we do not have the luxury of unlimited resources at our disposal. So that we have to, I said this before to you as well, that, we have to figure out what's the cloth that we have in which to cut our coat, as it were. And so that's being considered quite actively. All of these things make for the fact, and the consultations with the chief ministers, with the different stakeholders, there is the time is being taken. I know that some of us are being impatient, but I think the request from us would be for to have a bit more patience, because I think at this point of time it's important to get it right, and it's important to therefore take as many variables on board as we can before something like that is announced.
You said that we need to have a little bit more patience when it comes to the fiscal relief package, that the government wants to get it right, and which is why it's taking time. Could you give us some indication, though, sir, on what would be a realistic timeline? Are we now looking at the possibility of a package being announced post the 3rd of May so that we can fully factor in the implications of this extended lockdown?
Shereen, I wish I could give you a timeline. I'm afraid this is something far too complex for us. I think I know the fact that the government is seized of the matter at all different levels, at the highest levels, and I think you will, you'll get to hear it. Your suggestion, I think, is a reasonable one, which is that it's better to get as much data into, onto the table as we can, and therefore, if we know, for example, that the trend in the pandemic, the trend in rates of infection, etc., have changed, have plateaued, and we are not going to get into the worst situation, then I think that's something that we should be looking for. I mean, just as an example, God forbid, but if we need to put in a lot more resources into our health sector because of the state of the pandemic, then I think the fiscal allocation would have to be made accordingly. So I think there is, merit in taking as much data on board. But at the same time, I do appreciate the fact that, some sectors, especially the services sectors, have had a total revenue loss. I mean, their revenue is zero for this period of lockdown, and this demand is not going to come back. So to that extent, they do need relief. But again, here, the Prime Minister has appealed for compassion. The Prime Minister has appealed for the India Inc. To be a partner with us in sharing the extraordinary costs and the extraordinary impact of this completely unforeseen emergency and which has been imposed on us by this pandemic. So I think it's important to come together here at this point of time. The government, the RBI will have done their bit, will do their bit. I think India Inc. now needs to also be a little more patient and also allow the government enough time and data for us to be able to design a package that is appropriate.
So you're saying allow the government enough time and data. But, on the point that you made, the Prime Minister's appeal to India Inc. to be compassionate, but the response from industry is that, look, we are empathetic to what is going on. We understand that this is an emergency, but when your cash flow is zero, there is really not much leeway even for corporates to be able to extend a helping hand. So that's the predicament that not the large companies at this point in time, but the small and medium sector find themselves in. So while they appreciate the Prime Minister's appeal for compassion, they're saying we need compassion as well.
Sure. I mean, that point is very well taken. It's, as I said, I mean, I don't want to repeat myself, but as I said, all of this is well recognized and completely, within the government's attention. And, but there are sectors, as you know, for example, agriculture, where operations are, ongoing. And now with this announcement today, as you've seen, there's been a very significant amount of liberalization for even manufacture of IT hardware and oil refineries and gas and pharmaceuticals and the essential commodities which include not just the food but also the items of daily need. All the truckers have now been allowed to move, and the movement of goods is now permitted. The dhabas are open. So I think there is already by the government a calibrated move and a very significant move in permitting the economic activity to come back, and the rest of it, as I said, this is under consideration and will happen as soon as the government is ready to make that announcement.